back here somewhere that makes me sound tall. There we go. Hello, little friend. Wake up.
Good morning.
So we had a couple of questions during the break that I thought I would try to answer if I get my friend to speak to me. Hello. There we are. Exceed your vision. I'm trying to. Talk to me that way. So again, understanding the difference between true mental illness and whether or not it's maladaptive behavior is a highly, that's a hard call to make. And so you've got to start looking at how much insight does the person have. So if you look at the book of Romans, I believe that Romans chapter 12 is a very good discussion. After Paul establishes there's no advantage to being a Jew, there's no advantage to being a Gentile. Everybody that's ever been born with the ability for choice, when they got old enough, chose wrong. You've got a sin problem. It doesn't do you any good to fix your sin problem being a Jew. It doesn't do you any good to fix your sin problem being a Gentile. Everybody's got a sin problem. The only way to deal with that sin problem is through obeying God's grace and mercy and becoming baptized as a New Testament Christian. Romans chapter 6 goes through the beginnings and the endings of a person who is baptized. When you read Romans 6, you go, this begins, this ends, this begins, this ends, this begins, this ends. Now, a lot of times we run into problems when you study salvation, and you'll find what I call a proof text, where somebody will say, who confesses the name of the Lord shall be saved. Whoever believes in the name of the Lord shall be saved. If you're studying with somebody who does that, go to the book of Romans. And Romans is the implication is that he's writing to baptized believers. Don't you know that as many of us who are baptized into Christ have put on Christ? So you take faith only, confession only, repentance only, if that's a thing, and then baptism. The only thing that takes all four of those things and makes them one is baptism. So if you're baptized, you're a believer. If you're baptized, you're repentant. If you're baptized, you're a confessor. And so you say, if you want to take these four different quote-unquote theories for salvation, the only one that unifies all of them is baptism. You can lay that thing to rest pretty quick. Okay, so once he gets to the, hey, this is how a person solves their sin problem, he will spend some real practical time talking about this is how saved people interact. Romans chapter 12, this is how spiritually mature people behave. Romans chapter 13, this is how spiritually mature people behave with civil government. Romans chapter 14, this is how spiritually mature people behave with spiritually immature people who believe different things about special days and eating meat and food sacrificed to idols and only eating vegetables and all kinds of things. So there's a kind of a discussion of practical Christian living. Well, the more I look at Romans 12, I think you also get a description of how a spiritually, mentally healthy or mature person behaves. So look at Romans chapter 12. Romans 12 leads out with, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. We live the way we live because of our connection to God. The way we live doesn't connect us to God. That keeps us from being spiritually narcissistic, earning our way to heaven, thinking that somehow we've earned our own righteousness. In the book of Galatians, you have what the problem of called gospel plus one. And you study the book of Galatians. And this is tongue-in-cheek. Don't send me any emails. The auditorium adult class is usually for people who don't have enough motivation to get up and go to class somewhere else. And so you're studying the book of Galatians. What's the problem in Galatians? Judaizing teachers. That's right. What's a Judaizing teacher? You've been in the adult auditorium class, right? Bob, read verse 4. Bob reads verse 4. What do you think it says, Bob? I think it means what it says. Charlie, what do you think? I agree with Bob. All right, let's read verse 5. Wow, okay. So, what's a Judaizing teacher? I mean, that's an absolutely textbook correct answer. What does a Judaizing teacher teach? He teaches that your righteousness is based in ceremonial cleanliness laws. They equated ceremonial cleanliness with righteousness. Oh, you're a Christian? Yeah, but you're not a real Christian unless your boys are circumcised. You're not a real Christian and have tassels on your robe. You're not a real Christian unless you've read the Mishnah. You're not a real Christian unless you don't eat certain foods. Gospel plus one. They weren't trying to get them to compromise on homosexuality or marriage, divorce, or remarriage. You can be a Christian, but you're not a real Christian till you use this translation and wear a tie and go this many times a week. And they were corrupting the gospel, not with anything that was bad, but with man-made rules and regulations, that these things that we do connect us to God. Well, Paul leads out and says, listen, your sacrificial living doesn't connect you to God. Your connection to God demands sacrificial living. And Paul says this is not based on what God can do to you. This is based on what God has done for you. So if you understand what God has done for you, your reasonable response is to be a living sacrifice. And a living sacrifice is not burned up, it's burned out. You use everything that you've got every day doing what a sacrificial priest would do. What is that? Offering sacrifices to God, the way you walk, the way you talk. It's not about worship, it's about lifestyle. And so he says, and don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Transformation takes place in mind renewal. That's the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy. That's the basis of dealing with anxiety. That's the basis of dealing with fears and phobias, because when I change the way I think about something, I change the way I interact with something. I wrote a book on grappling. It's called Grappling with Life, Controlling Your Inside Space. I wrote it for the jiu-jitsu crowd so I could have some influence with them. One of the principles in grappling is control the head, control the body. If I control your head, I control everything. If I control the way you think about salvation, if I control the way you think about yourself, if I control the way you think about church, the way you think about sin, the way you think about righteousness, the way you think about sacrifice. When I control what you think, when I control your head, I control your body. And so Paul says, listen, as saved people, we're connected to God, and our connection to God dictates our ethics. Our ethics don't create our connection to God. When the Philistines captured the Ark of the Covenant in 1 Samuel chapter 4, did they become God's special people? Now wait a minute, Ark of the Covenant. What does that Ark represent? Your line is the covenant. What does that Ark represent?
The covenant.
The covenants. Okay, so the Philistines have it. Now they're God's special people, right? No! They didn't have a covenant with God because they had an ark. They had an ark because they had a covenant. You live the way you live because you have a connection to God. The way you live doesn't connect you to God because you can't do it. Doesn't give you an advantage to be a Jew or a Gentile. There's none righteous, no, not one. All have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And once I recognize that God took me from a sin place to a saved place because of His mercy, then I respond to that. It's my reasonable service. It's a duh. What would you do to that? Well, that's how you respond to that. You give yourself as a living sacrifice, and then don't be conformed to the way the world thinks, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Transformation comes from mind renewal. The way you think controls the way you act. And if you don't change the way you think, you can't change the way you act. So Paul establishes that for these Christians in Rome. And then he just basically does some real kind of broad paintbrush stuff. For I say, verse 3, through the grace given to me, everyone who is among you not to think more highly of himself than he ought to think. A spiritually and mentally healthy person sees themselves in the proper perspective. They're not narcissistic. They don't see themselves as too great. The Judaizing teachers in Galatians said, hey, unless you add to the gospel this, and this, you don't have the marks of real righteousness. And Paul said, if we or an angel from heaven teach anything other than the gospel that was brought to you, let him be accursed. And the only thing worse than violating a law that God gave you is creating a law that God didn't. And so Paul says, listen, you're not supposed to think more highly of yourself than you ought to think. And maybe you've been around people who had a self-selected criterion for righteousness. How healthy were those people actually? When I was a little boy, we didn't go a lot of places. I would stay up on Friday nights and watch the Friday Night Frights, the black and white horror movies. Put a frozen pizza in the oven, cook it for 20 minutes, eat bad pizza and watch bad TV. You know what I learned from every monster movie I ever watched? The monster you create will eat you. That's the way all those movies end. The thing comes out of the basement, eats a mad scientist, right? The werewolf gets out of the cage, eats a mad scientist. When you have a self-selected criterion for righteousness, and these people are in and these people are out, that circle gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And Paul talks to Timothy about groups of people who bite and devour one another. So Paul warns his audience, don't think more highly of yourself than you ought to think, but think soberly. Think in a balanced way. Think in a secure way, because God has dealt with each of us a measure of faith. You have some faith stewardship that I don't have, and I have some faith stewardship that you don't have, because we're not all on the same playing field. And you're responsible for using your measure of faith, and I'm responsible for using my measure of faith. And it's never about comparing ourselves with each other. If you compare, and there's two things that happen to us when we're unhealthy. We compare our insides, what we know about us, with other people's outsides, only what we see about them. That's a terrible way to keep score. You're driving to church in the minivan, you got 4 kids, you're threatening everybody with death. When I get out of this car, everybody better have the same pair of shoes on, And then you get out, and then the family across the way gets out there holding hands and smiling. Rainbows and angels flying around their heads. And you think, I'm such a loser as a parent. No, they were threatening their kids on their way over here too. Okay? And it's easy to compare our insides, what we know about us, with only what we see about you. That's a terrible way to keep score. And sometimes when the Sermon on the Mount, when Matthew records, Jesus say, judge not that you be not judged. And how can you look at a speck in somebody's eye when you got a 2x4 sticking out of your own eye? There's the opposite of that, where I'm going to ignore the big issues in my life and only point out the little bitty issues in your life. I went to a Chris Herzog seminar one time. Chris Herzog's oddly enough a martial artist, and I went to a leg lock seminar. I just overcome some surgeries and was trying to get active again, and so I went to this leg lock seminar, and I drove from the leg lock seminar to Doublehead Resort, did a retreat for Andy White. Walked in the door, sat down in a circle of people. Andy said, Brother Lonnie, what you been doing? I said, been in a leg lock seminar. I said, what do you do at leg lock seminars? I said, we learn how to do leg locks. There's this thing called an outside heel hook. I would put my knee behind your knee and wrap my heel over the top of your hip. Your toes would be in my armpit. I would put where my watch would be on your heel. I grab my other arm and pull up, and by the time you know to tap, you're having ACL surgery. Pretty cool little deal. Or I trap that toe in my armpit, reach under, get an S grip, pull my shoulders up, squeeze my elbows together, and can break your tibia and fibia in your leg. That's called a straight ankle lock. And so I explained that this is what I've been learning to do to people for fun and enjoyment.
Lovely.
And this kid sitting beside me goes, well, good luck with that. And he lays his leg in my lap. He'd been blown out of his house in the tornadoes in 1989 and lost one of his legs. And from his knee down was a gray titanium steel bar. I said, cool, we're going to Facebook. So we went outside on the porch, and I threw this leg lock on him. And of course, just to make a good picture, I grabbed the bar and reached under and grabbed my own wrist, which is a figure 4 lock like you do a Kimura. And I took the picture and was straining for theatrical purposes and sent the picture to Chris Herzog. I said, hey Chris, your leg lock doesn't work. He immediately texted back and said, your grip is wrong. The problem in this picture was not my grip, people. I had a 2-inch titanium steel bar I couldn't have bent with my truck. But he's only going to look at that one little detail. How many times have we looked at somebody and picked out their one little detail and decided they weren't good enough? They didn't match up. They didn't measure up. How many times have we done it to other people? How many times have we done it to us? By the grace given to you, don't think more highly than you ought to think, but think as God has dealt with you and given you a measure of faith. For as we have many members in one body, but all the members don't have the same function, so we being many are one body in Christ and individually members of one another. So there's a connectedness. I'm connected to God and you're connected to God. Because you're connected to God, I'm connected to God, we're connected to each other. And that connectedness goes beyond Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, white, black, green, purple, rich, poor, popular, not popular, gun toter, Second Amendment, whatever. You're connected to God, I'm connected to God, therefore we're connected to each other. And I've got a job to do. The church is never described as an organization. It is only ever described as an organism. It's interconnected and interdependent. And your ability to function as a healthy member of a system indicates that you're spiritually mature and mentally healthy. The body has many members. You don't have the same function, but you have a job. Individually, you're members of one another. Verse 6, having different gifts then, according to the grace that is given to us, use them. Now, if your gift is prophecy, prophesy. If it's ministry, use it in ministering. If it's teaching, teach. And then we typically think about church leadership as prophesying and teaching and ministering, right? Up front, out loud, wearing a tie with a title. Look at these next few verses. If it's in exhortation or encouragement, or giving with liberality, or leading with diligence, or mercy with cheerfulness. How many people put that in your spiritual gifts category? I'm an encourager and I'm a forgiver. And I can cheerfully forgive you. Well, we forgive, but we don't like to cheerfully forgive. I've got to forgive him. Well, you don't, but God will forgive you the way you forgive me. So life's about choices. But all of a sudden, Paul says, look, when you understand what God's done for you, and you understand it's not you, it's not something you achieved or earned or bought, it's something that God did. Because of what God did, you have to behave this way, and you change the way you think. You change the way you think inside a system. You have a good, healthy view of you, and that good, healthy view of you gives you a good, healthy view of other people, and then you can function well and play well with others, and you can do your job. How many church problems have you seen because people couldn't work well with others? Couldn't cooperate with a system? You know, the deacon who's not in charge of a ministry but in charge of a fiefdom. Hey, Jesus, the deacon that's not in charge of casting out demons is casting out demons. What do we do with him? You said, leave him alone. He's doing good work. But he doesn't have a title. He's casting out demons. It says something about himself, right? And we get people who can't work together on committees, they can't work together on budgets, they don't work together worshiping. They have these criterions for, I can't get along with you. I remember when it used to be a big deal to have songs on a screen. Now you could paint scriptures on a sheet and preach for 9 hours, but you couldn't flash one on an electric string, electric sheet. You know. And we create these things where we create excuses not to work well with others. And Paul says spiritually mature people and mentally healthy people systemically work well together. In Stephen Glenn's book, Raising Self-Reliant Children in a Self-Indulgent World, he says you got to have 4 skills. Interpersonal, how you get along with you. Intrapersonal, how you get along with others. That's opposite. I said it wrong. Intrapersonal, how you get along with me. Interpersonal, how you get along with others. Systemic skills, how you get along in a system. And judgmental skills. Do I make good decisions based on values? Paul just said the same thing in Romans chapter 12. Verse 9, let love be without hypocrisy. When I get involved with you, and I'm spiritually mature and mentally healthy, my emotional exchanges with you are not manipulative. I love you without hypocrisy. I'm not trying to earn your approval. You're not trying to earn mine. We love each other because we love each other. I'm an imperfect person. I'm married to an imperfect person. We gave birth to a person when she got old enough, she became imperfect. I live in a neighborhood with imperfect people. I go to church with imperfect people. I work with imperfect people. I'm self-employed. Okay? Why do our wills get in the ditch when an imperfect person lives up to their capacity and behaves imperfectly? We hold people hostage with our love. I love you if, I love you when. By the way, that's why tough love doesn't work. If you put consequences on somebody's behavior and in the back of your mind, this will cause them to do X, Y, or Z, that's manipulation. Consequences cannot be punitive. I'm going to punish you. And it can't be vindictive. I'm going to show you. Consequences are based on my values. This is a value I have, and based on those values, these are the parameters. It's not about you. It's about me. It doesn't say anything about you if I put a boundary up between our values. But we often think, if I do this, then they'll do that. That's manipulation and control. Paul says you love each other without hypocrisy. I don't bribe you with my approval, and I don't bribe you with my love. I don't bribe you with my friendship. I don't bribe you with anything. I love you because I love you. Love is the intentional and, if necessary, personally costly investment into the good of another. It does not require reciprocity. I don't care what you can do for me, and you don't have to deserve it. By the way, that's how God loved us. We didn't deserve it. We can't do anything for God. It was personally costly investment into our good. So Paul says if you're spiritually mature and mentally healthy, you don't play emotional games with people. He continues on. Abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. That's another mind shift change. The ability to distinguish between good and evil. If you can't tell the difference between good and evil, if you can't regulate your behavior because there's a value system that says this is good or this is bad, you're not responsible for those choices. But now, when I can tell the difference between good and bad, then I've got to change my mind and go, this is bad. You guys had oatmeal cream pies and Twinkies on the table. And my wife's not here. Okay? You know, I go to the Chinese restaurant all the time at the mall. I need teriyaki chicken, white rice, no vegetables. You don't like vegetables? No, my wife makes me eat them. So she gives me no vegetables. At the mall the other day with Jackie. 2 people deep in line. Little girl looks at me and goes, she put vegetables on my plate. Hooked me up. It was awesome. I'm an emergent diabetic. That oatmeal cream pie is poison. It represents neuropathy. It represents blindness. It represents heart disease. That Twinkie dipped in honey represents death. And as soon as I realize, hey, that's good, it tastes good, and I love them, but they are forbidden in my life because of what I want most, not what I want now. I can abhor what is evil and cling to what is good. And we've got to quit glorifying sin. And people who can't make the distinction between good and evil aren't mentally healthy. Or they're not spiritually mature, or they're neither one. But once I start looking at, oh, look what the world does, don't you wish you could? No, I'm glad I can't do that. Because everything God's ever asked me to do is good for me, and everything God's ever asked me not to do is bad for me. God didn't design us to be miserable. Now, He's more concerned about our submission than our happiness, but God says this is how you live optimally. You don't lust, you don't covet, you don't lie, you don't cheat. You're not selfish, you don't murder. All those things make you an optimally functioning human. But it's understanding that when God says it's bad for you, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, or relationally. And if God says it's good for you. And so Paul says, listen, this is how a mature person behaves. Be kindly affectionate one to another with brotherly love, in honor or giving preference to one another. When we interact in a system, I've got to be in a position where I'm comfortable not being in charge. I'm comfortable not being first. I'm comfortable not being the most important person in the room. I'm comfortable living in a way that is not selfish. Typically, selfish people aren't very spiritually mature. Love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and control of the self. Until you can handle self, you can't handle anything spiritually. If you're going to come after me, you must deny self, take up your cross, and follow me. Everything that is sinful starts with a temptation, and all temptation starts with something that we want selfishly. We're drawn away by our own lust and enticed. Drawn away and enticed, bait in a trap, a lure on the end of a line. So Paul says, look, you not only do you have to not be manipulative with your emotions, you understand the difference between good and evil, and you treat each other in a way that is not selfish, but selfless. You give diligence to the other person, not lagging in diligence, fervent in spirit, serving the Lord. Motivation, impulse control, delayed gratification. Paul says in bad circumstances, you don't let your circumstances control how you react. You react the way you react in spite of your circumstances. The book of Hebrews teaches that your faith doesn't affect your circumstances, but your circumstances don't affect your faith. The first part of Hebrews chapter 11 is superhero Avenger movie endings. And the last part of Hebrews chapter 11 says others were killed, tortured, sawn asunder, lived in caves, wore goat skins and sheep skins. They had the same faith. Some of these people killed lions and ran off armies, and the ladies had their dead returned back to them. This group was part of the dead. Your circumstances don't affect your faith, but your faith doesn't affect your circumstances. So Paul says you got to be in such a way that you don't lag in diligence. You're fervent in spirit. You're serving the Lord. You rejoice in hope. You're patient in tribulation, and you continually steadfastly in prayer. So again, you don't let your happiness or your joy or your satisfaction come from things that are external. They come from things that are internal, and that's an internal locus of control. A spiritually grounded person and a mentally healthy person behaves that way. Continue reading. You're distributing to the needs of the saints, and you're given to hospitality. Again, goes back to you're not a selfish person. You're a person who can share. You're not consuming all your world's goods on yourself. And you're able to not just think about, hey, do I need all these things, but is my house and my car and my food and my money given to me as an opportunity to minister? Paul will tell Timothy specifically, command those who are rich in this present world not to put their trust in riches, but to trust in God, who gives to all men richly, that they might be rich in good works, willing to give, able to share. You have what you have, not because you're somebody special. You have what you have because you've got a job to do something special. Now, because you don't understand. I went to work, went to college, I earned my PhD. Yeah, got it. What you deserve to do to have a brain that can earn a degree. Now, you don't understand, I'm a Division I caliber athlete. What you do deserve to have legs that run. Lungs that have a VO2 max. Hey folks, everything you've got, everything you've done is a gift. What you deserve to do to be done to be born in America. You just won the lottery. You're wearing a pair of shoes, you're in the top 5% of the world's population. Most of you got to choose which pair of shoes you wore. That puts you in the top 3. Okay? We ate clean water, had food left over, including the oatmeal cream pies and the Twinkies. So if we're rich beyond measure, what you do to deserve that? What are you going to do with it? I'm going to distribute to the needs of the saints. I'm going to be given to hospitality. Now, when people don't behave the way they should, when I run into difficult people, when I run into people who are inconvenient, when I run into people who require some extra stuff, bless those who persecute you, bless them and do not curse. Christianity is counterintuitive. That's not the way I handle problems. That's not the way I like to deal with bad people. Okay? Rejoice with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep. Don't be self-consumed. Our biggest problem in getting along with other people is that we're very self-centered. We tend to be egotistical. We don't mean to be. Teenagers especially, that's just the way you're wired. You'll grow out of it. But you go to somebody, you ever notice that when you go to talk to somebody at a funeral home and their aunt died, you end up talking about when your aunt died? Well, that's a mistake. It's their aunt that's dead, not yours. But we tend to be self-centered. We tend, when we communicate, not to demonstrate that we understand others. We communicate to make you understand me. And my real goal in communication is to make sure you know that I understand you. And when we get to the same page, oh, you understand me, then we have the chance for influence and change. Jesus came to the planet. We do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses. He came and went, look, I get this. I've had one of those bodies. They tore mine up. They murdered me. I get it. I know what it's like to cry in a garden and your sweat come out like blood. I know what it's like to beg God to not let something happen and it still happen. I know what it's like to be in such pain that an angel has to minister to me. Jesus gets it. He understands when we have distress. He understands when we have problems. It's not a sin to be burdened beyond our capacity to bear it. It's a sin to quit. So we learn not to be self-centered, not to be egotistical. So when you have a celebration, it's not about me, it's about you. When you have a tragedy, it's not about me, it's about you. If I can't get out of my own head and see things from the other person's perspective, I'm not spiritually mature, or I may not be mentally healthy. Be of the same mind one toward another. Do not set your mind on high things, but associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. There's a place where I have to admit that everybody that I meet knows something I don't know, can see something I can't see. You ever been around anybody who couldn't tell them anything? You ever been around anybody who wouldn't listen? You ever been around anybody who wouldn't take any advice? You ever been around anybody who all they wanted to do is tell you what you were doing wrong and offer you unsolicited advice? Paul said, don't be that guy. Recognize you can learn something. Yeah. Hey, Balaam's riding on a donkey. And the donkey behaves in a way that Balaam doesn't understand. Balaam starts beating it. Finally, the donkey gets a chance to talk. And Balaam said, you've abused me. I think Balaam does not understand the word abused. He's the guy doing all the whacking on his donkey, you know. And the donkey said, hey, by the way, there's things that I know you don't know, things I can see you can't see. Hey, look, if a donkey can function that way, I think most people I meet can function that way. You know something I don't know. You can see something I can't see. If I'll take the time to shut up and listen to it, I might learn something. Okay? But when we're not mentally healthy, we're not spiritually mature, we tend to think of our own opinions, we tend to think of our own ideas, we tend to follow our own agendas. Associate with the humble. Do not be wise in your own opinion. Do not repay evil for evil, having regard for good things in the sight of all men. So I don't get to play the reciprocity game. My behavior towards you is not dictated by your behavior toward me. I don't get to be mean to you because you're mean to me. I don't get to be rude to you because you're rude to me. Your behavior has no impact on my ethical obligations as a Christian. I treat you the way I treat you because of who my Father is. You've heard it said by those of old, love your neighbor, hate your enemy. I can do that math. But I say, bless those who curse you, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you, in order that you may be sons of your Father. It doesn't say that when I treat you this way, you'll be nice, you'll invite me to nice parties, and I'll be the president of the HOA association. No, it says I behave the way I behave in order to be consistent with my connection to God. It has nothing to do with your response to it. I treat you the way I treat you, and it does not factor in your behavior or your response. It only factors in my value system. I treat you the way I treat you because of who God is. And so I'm not going to repay evil for evil. I don't get to balance those books. The only way you balance books is forgive people. Paul will say earlier in Romans, let no debt remain outstanding, but to love one another. Owe no man anything but to love one another. What that means is I don't have any unfinished business with you. I'm not walking around trying to pay you back or get even or make those books balance. One of those guilty confessions. When I first went into private practice as a therapist. Therapists charge by the hour. It's a therapeutic hour. It's 50 minutes. It's not 60. Okay? And I charge by the hour. Sometimes people come and visit you and they don't pay you, which is inconvenient. Well, as a young therapist, I would go at the end of the month and go down my books. Saw this one got paid, saw this one got paid, saw this one got called, this one didn't pay. Send them a note. They still don't pay you, by the way. 3 months into this thing, I realized, hey, I'm spending 10 minutes on a person who's already stolen an hour from me. Well, if you already stole an hour from me, why am I giving you extra time? Just write it off, let it go. That's between you and God. They're not going to cut my lights off. I quit worrying about it. I just don't worry about it anymore. I got no unfinished business. Forgiveness is not about what you owe me. It's what I owe you. If I don't owe you anything, we got no unfinished business, I can live my life and be in charge. Now, I think there is a place for forgiveness and reconciliation. But I also think we're allowed to forgive without reconciliation. Now, when God forgives, it's always forgiveness and reconciliation. But sometimes we can forgive and it not include reconciliation. For instance, Joey borrows my truck. Joey, be careful. Joey's not careful. Wraps my truck around the telephone pole. Ruins it. I don't sue Joey. I don't sue his insurance company. I got a good insurance company. They fix my truck. Joey says, hey, Lonnie, I need to borrow your truck. I toss him the keys. That's forgiveness with reconciliation. We're back at the same level we've always been. Okay? Scenario number 2, Joey borrows my truck. Wraps around the pole. I don't sue him. Don't sue his insurance company. My insurance company pays for it. We fix my truck. Joey called me and says, hey, Lonnie, I need to borrow your truck. I go, what are we moving? Well, I got a piano at my house. Okay, I'll drive over there. Is he forgiven? Yeah, he still has access to my truck. Is he reconciled? He ain't driving my truck. He scoots the seat back too far anyway. I can't reach the pedals. But anyway, so, we're no unfinished business. I'm not forbidding him to use my truck. I help him move. He has access to my truck. He just doesn't get to treat it like it's his truck anymore. Forgiveness without reconciliation. I think there's a place for that sometimes in Christianity. As long as that forgiveness means I've got no debt outstanding. Now, earlier in our seminar, I said that I believed that most of what was written in the New Testament included an assumption of the bell curve of normalcy. And I probably couldn't defend that in a debate. I don't debate anyway. But I probably couldn't defend it. Except for this next verse. As much as possible, as much as it depends on you, live at peace with all men. Now, when I first read that verse as a young Christian, it scared me to death. You guys know who Brian Regan is? Brian Regan's a weird comedian. He kind of has my sense of humor. I really like him. He says, picture this, you're 8 years old. You're sitting in the living room, playing Legos, watching black and white TV, Saturday morning cartoons. Smokey Bear, not Smokey the Bear, Smokey Bear. Smokey first name, Bear last name. It's not Smokey the Bear, Smokey Bear. Smokey Bear pops on TV and goes, only you can prevent forest fires. You're by yourself in the living room and you're 8 and you go, me? I'm 8 years old, that's a lot of pressure. Then you're driving down the road, you see smoke come out of the forest and Smokey appears. Good job, Brian. You've let the world down. I used to read that verse and like, me? That's a lot of pressure. I'm 8 years old spiritually. Listen what it says. As much as possible. To me, now I may be looking for excuses, but to me that intimates it might not be possible. As much as it depends on you. I think that opens the door for, in some of these cases, it may not depend on me. And when you're talking about being a spiritually, mentally healthy person, I think there is a place where it is your right. Now, so many times in Christianity, I put your needs above my rights. That's 100% in my marriage. Her needs come before my rights. 100% with my children when they're dependent. Her needs come before my rights. My mom and dad, needs before rights. Generally speaking, that happens in the brotherhood with my church members. Your needs, my rights are subservient to those. But in some cases, it's not about your needs. It's about maladaptation and dysfunction and manipulation and control and abuse. And there's some people you can't get along with. As much as possible, if it's not possible, and as much as it depends on you, and sometimes it doesn't depend on me, I get you to draw those lines. Now make sure you're drawing those lines that involve physical damage, emotional damage, intellectual damage, or spiritual damage. Make sure this is not one of those things that's just inconvenient. This person requires a lot of energy. It's got to be a thing where you're protecting either the body or protecting yourself. Paul says, mark those who cause division. Paul says, If you've got a guy who claims to be a Christian and he's an extortioner or an idolater or an adulterer, you don't even eat with that guy. Jesus said, what God has joined together, let no man put asunder. If this person behaves in a sexually immoral way, you don't have to stay married to him, and you can get married to somebody else. There are several places in the New Testament where the behavior says, hey, this is not possible and it may not depend on you. 3 different times. And you read Paul's suffering resume, where Paul lists the things that had happened to him. And some of these things we don't even have any details on. I hope, Lord willing, to talk about 2 Corinthians chapter 1 tomorrow, when Paul says, when we were in Asia, we were burdened beyond our capacity to bear. And we don't even have any details on that story. He was by himself. When he says we, it's an editorial plural. He was by himself, and something happened to him that he said was outside my ability to bear it. And yet Paul says, hey, I'm a Roman citizen. You can't treat me that way. He's chained between 2 Roman guards. And this centurion says, look, you talk to me in Greek and you talk to the audience in Aramaic, and you've made me look like a fool. I'm going to beat the truth out of you. Paul goes, can you really do that if I'm a Roman citizen? Read that chapter in Acts where they leave him in the room with the commander by himself. The commander's forces went, see you, boss, and they left that room. He's in a jail in Philippi. He'd been beaten publicly and put in stocks. And they come the next day and go, hey, you want to leave town? Paul said, look, they put me in here publicly without a trial, and I'm a Roman citizen. Tell them if they want me to leave town, come get me and escort me out. Paul is standing before Felix and Agrippa. And they said, well, tell you what, we just don't understand all this Christianity business. We're going to send you back to Jerusalem, let them do a trial there. There 40 men took a vow they wouldn't eat until they killed Paul. It's been 2 years, by the way. I hope they had some Twinkies and some oatmeal cream pies. He said, we're going to send you back to Jerusalem for trial. Paul said, no, I don't think so. I want to see the emperor. Excuse, I'm sorry? Yeah, I'm going to see the emperor. I've got a right as a Roman citizen to take my case to the Caesar. And I will go to Rome before I go back to Jerusalem and be in part of their kangaroo court. I've seen how they do court in Jerusalem. 3 different occasions, Paul says, you can't treat me this way. I think there are times when there are toxic people in our lives and in our congregations where the church has an obligation to say, hey, look, can we sacrifice the mission for a man, or can we sacrifice a man for the mission? You got to be careful that this is not a get out of jail free card. This is not something you can do just when people are inconvenient or people require a lot of extra attention or where people are burdensome. This has got to be something where you say, hey, look, this is a place where peace is not possible, and it's not about our choices, it's about their choices. There's some very, very difficult decisions elders have to make about people who cause division and about people who are constantly unhappy or people who are dangerous. There are people that are dangerous. Now, 3 to 5% of all violence in America is committed by the mentally ill. A mentally ill person is 28 times more likely to be a victim of violence than they are to be violent. But we see them on the news because that's what makes the news. An ER doctor will tell you COVID is the most deadly thing that's hit the planet since leprosy. A guy who's 59 and works with the public will tell you it's not that big a deal. Who's right? Well, the truth is not at the extremes. A herpetologist will tell you that a snake is nothing to be afraid of. My wife would shoot one out of your pocket if you were wearing it. Who's right? Neither one. It's a mixture. So people who are in public service, people who work in the jails, people who are first responders, the only time they meet the mentally ill, they are acting in ways that are troublesome. When I interact with the mentally ill, they're sitting in my office and keep an appointment. And they have some regulation, some self-insight, and some desire to get better. Some people who are mentally ill don't know they're mentally ill. A vast majority of people suffering from schizophrenia don't realize they have schizophrenia. Schizophrenia means the split mind. And that doesn't mean they have 2 personalities. It means their mind has split from reality. And a lot of those folks don't know how sick they are. They don't understand that you can't see what they see, that you can't hear what they hear. Or They feel like they're especially gifted and can see things you can't. But in some cases, especially in family systems and in the church family system, Paul said, look, as much as possible, as much as it depends on you, you live at peace with all people. If your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him a drink. In doing so, you'll heap coals of fire on his head. The idea is that if I can minister to you, give you what you need. So many times, the limits we set on people are punitive or vindictive. If they're punitive or vindictive, we're manipulating people. Values and consequences have to be consistent. I do what I do because of my values, not because of something to get back at you or to change your behavior. The prodigal son's father allowed him to end up in a pig pen and allowed him to decide to come home. He did not go down there and rescue him. Okay? If you compare the prodigal son and Absalom, Absalom is banished. He's on restriction. But he leaves banishment and comes back to the kingdom. Well, you can be in Jerusalem, you just can't come to the palace. So he hangs out at the gate with 50 dudes in a chariot. And what does he do? He steals the heart of the people. He makes a run at the kingdom. He makes a run at the kingdom against a guy whose theme song is, Saul has slain his thousands, David has slain his 10,000s. Let me tell you something. Killing a man was no problem for David. David would kill you, pull your head off, use it as a puppet, and apologize to himself. I'm sorry, Mr. David. Okay? They're leaving. David is leaving his castle. He's barefooted. It's at night, and he's weeping because of this upstart, arrogant, rebellious little punk Absalom. And as he's leaving the castle, a guy's on the other side of the Kidron throwing rocks at him. And one of David's lieutenants says, would you like me to bring him his head? That's not number one in my conflict resolution strategies. That's way down. His go-to thing was, hey, David, that guy's throwing rocks at you. You want his head? If that's the way you do business, how come Absalom's not swinging on something right now? And David could kill you with a rock from a long way away. A spear, a bow, or a sword. He'd been taught to shoot a bow by Jonathan. And yet he leaves the castle with this kid sleeping with his concubines. He's in the dark, barefooted, leaving the warrior, undefeated warrior king of Israel. And then when it comes time to take care of business, he divides his army into 3 factions and says, deal gently with the young man Absalom. Absalom runs into a guy named Joab. And Joab says, the king really ain't got the stomach to handle this kid. He puts 3 in a tight pattern in his heart. Depending on how you read, it's javelins or darts. People who are difficult and who are toxic, they'll either have a pig pen moment, you flip a coin and they decide to come home, or they'll run into their Joab. If you don't put limits on people, they'll never have the opportunity for the pig pen moment. All human behavior is reward motivated. I do what I do the way I do it because it works for me. When my behavior costs me more than it costs you, I'll reevaluate my behavior. It's not my addiction, it's yours. It's not my high school diploma, it's yours. It's not my scholarship, it's yours. I've got a degree, I'm not doing any more homework. But if I make it my problem, I make it my degree, I make it my addiction, I make it my mood, I make it my whatever, then it's not yours, it's mine. And if I'm continually fixing that problem, becoming responsible for something I don't control, eventually you'll run into somebody who's not going to play that game. Now maybe it's wrong to compare the prodigal son and Absalom, but I don't think so. Absalom has no restrictions, or he gets this kind of message from his dad. And then he runs into somebody who's willing to say, parents, if you don't discipline your kids, there's a drug dealer, there's a burglar, there's a gang leader, There's a cop. You're not going to take that off of them. I'm not saying anything bad about the cops. Okay? When you teach them that authority doesn't apply to them, the men who wield authority, either in the hierarchy of a gang or the hierarchy of a cartel, don't tolerate being disrespected and disobeyed. They don't tolerate dishonesty, even among thieves. And the police don't either. And you're teaching your children, hey, their authority doesn't matter. Eventually they believe God's authority doesn't matter. And you're creating a problem. As much as possible, as much as it depends on you, live at peace. If your enemy's hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. You're not being punitive, you're not being vindictive, but if he runs away from home, you don't have to send him a care package. Because if you don't put some limits, you don't put some boundaries, you don't put some consequences, I believe they have a Joab moment in their future that you can do nothing to intervene with. And then lastly, Paul will tell his audience, and do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Spiritually mature and mentally healthy people do not respond type and kind. I have the ability to treat you differently than you treat me. I'm not reactionary, but I'm proactive. I don't say, well, this person was unkind to me, I get to be unkind to them. I don't overcome evil with evil, I overcome evil with good. And when we learn that us being vindictive and us being punitive really doesn't work, but that we try to maintain consistency when it's not toxicity, I think we have healthy relationships, healthy boundaries. Now, if you read Romans chapter 12 and you go, hey, you know, I basically behave and react in those contexts, chances are you have the capacity for self-insight, self-regulation, delayed gratification, impulse control, motivation, and empathy. And if you can't do those things there, then you're not mentally healthy probably. Now, if you're choosing not to do those things, then you're either spiritually immature, spiritually rebellious, making a choice to make other people responsible for your outcomes. And that's not a healthy way to live spiritually. It's not a healthy way to live emotionally. It's not a healthy way to live psychologically. Okay? So, I'll take a break, see if you have any questions. Is that a practical use of Romans 12? Okay, I think anything that's true spiritually can be, if it's true at A, it's true at Z, that's what makes it true. So any other questions? I know we talked a little bit about trauma, talked a little bit about anxiety. I'll talk a little bit about suicide tomorrow in the lesson from 2 Corinthians. Yes, sir?
Verse 2, renewing of the mind. How do you help people come to the reality that that's what needs to be done?
I define a problem as a lack of resources. Okay? And so sometimes the way we think about things is not helpful or not functional. How many times have you reacted this way and it got you what you wanted? That's a simple discussion you could have with a teenager. How many times have you rebelled, broke curfew, and got more freedom?
Never.
None? Oh, okay. So what do you think about coming in at curfew? What do you think would happen there? I broke curfew for 10 minutes, yeah? And how long you been grounded for? 3 weeks. So you traded 3 weekends for 10 minutes. Can you make change for a 20? I think you patiently have to say, you think you're getting this, but you're getting this. And so helping them see, Jordan Peterson does a thing called self-authoring. It's this little kit you buy, and you say, these are the choices I'm making, and this is the difference it'll make in 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, and 5 years. If you make different choices, could you predict where you'd be? Now, which one of those do you want? And changing the way I think about that might change the way that I respond to that. I'm not sure if I answered your question. Okay, all right, a good question. I'm glad you made me clear that up. Other folks? All right, so the remaining question is, now that you've looked at Romans chapter 12, you've got to do some self-evaluation. Am I a person who's being submissive to the will of God? Now, if you're not a New Testament Christian, you have the initial problem that was in Romans. You got a sin problem. You owe a debt you cannot pay. You can't do enough good. you can't attend enough things. The only person who can solve your sin problem is God. And that's faith in the crucified and resurrected Messiah. When I believe that that is who he is, real belief creates repentance. Because when I believe that, that's not an intellectual assent. That's, oh wow, that's the Son of God and he died and he rose from the dead. That renews my mind. That's repentance. If that's God and this is me, that doesn't match. I want to fix that. I'll give him control of my life. I'll call him Lord. When I confess him as Lord and as the Son of God, then I abdicate control and give it to him. I die to myself. I die with him. I'm buried with him. And I rise with him to walk a new life. If you haven't done that, you got the original sin problem from the first time you chose between right and wrong and chose wrong. And that's not something you can fix for yourself. You need to have that fixed. Because way more important than mental health is spiritual health. And sin is a disease that no one can cure but God. And if you're not a New Testament Christian, that needs to be in your thought process tonight. Second thing is, if you are a New Testament Christian, are you living like a spiritually mature person? Now, some of you are, the answer is, no, I'm not. Well, you've been a Christian 12 seconds. You get time to grow and you get time to mature. Well done, good and faithful servant, not well done, good and perfect servant. But if you've been a Christian a number of years and the person before Christ and the person after Christ is not significantly different, then you probably need to make some adjustments based on Romans 12, submitting to God, being a sacrifice, and renewing your mind. We're ready to help you in either case. We can study with you, we can pray with you, we can baptize you. Probably can't meet the counseling needs, but we can meet the spiritual needs tonight, and we offer you the Lord's invitation right now while we stand, while we sing.